Welcome to Primetime Weekend. I'm Nicole Wallace. Let's get right to the week's top stories. We talk a lot about split screens around here and the Earth 1, Earth 2 of it all, but this might be the ultimate political split screen news cycle. One side is executing a coherent political strategy, barnstorming through battleground states like a heat-seeking missile, while the other has been mostly out of sight this week, hanging out at Mar-a-Lago. One side offering powerful, infectious, joyful warrior vibes, the other offering whatever they call Donald Trump's rambling, apocalyptic, lie-filled, divorce from reality message yesterday, to say nothing of the growing enthusiasm gap. Tonight's rally in Arizona caps off a week of rock star receptions for the Democratic ticket. Every battleground state they've set foot in, from Pennsylvania to Wisconsin to Michigan. Harris and Walz have commanded crowds that Donald Trump makes clear he still dreams of. People standing in line for hours, walking miles to get to their rallies. Crowds so enormous they spilled out across airplane hangars. And there's a different reception on the ground to tell you about. Today in Arizona, the local papers are waxing poetic about the political phenomenon that is the Kamala Harris-Tim Walz ticket. Here's one of those headlines. Quote, "There's never been something like this." That's referring to tonight's rally outside of Phoenix. And this, quote, "The energy level is just out of this world." Meanwhile, over in Montana, the local press there reporting out stories about how Trump still hasn't paid his bills from the last time he came to town. Or consider that Kamala Harris is racking up endorsements from lifelong Republicans. People like the first female mayor of Scottsdale, Arizona, who described this political moment right now as, quote, "a sea change in attitude in Arizona," adding, quote, "People are just joyous. People are so confident of the job that Vice President Harris can do that there's room for joy," end quote. There it is again, the J word. Joy. There's also the historic political endorsement today from the nation's oldest and largest Latino civil rights group, the League of United Latin American Citizens, which endorsed Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. It's the first time in the organization's 95-year history that it has made a presidential endorsement. In a press release, they cited the urgent need to put a stop to this, quote, "the politics of hate-mongering and scapegoating Latinos and immigrants." And Trump? He seems to be experiencing whatever the opposite of momentum is, struggling now with even some of the furthest corners of the MAGA movement, like the mega popular podcaster Joe Rogan, as well as right-wing pundits Nick Fuentes and Laura Loomer. So the split screen is not so subtle today. Contagious enthusiasm and the competent political strategy being executed versus 1 week spent in Mar-a-Lago, culminating in some MAGA loyalists turning on the candidate. Maybe it could be boiled down to the politics of joy versus the politics of retribution. The New York Times writes this, quote, "Harris is positioning herself as the smiling trooper who is asking voters to choose between the future and the past. We are not going back," she tells her large crowds, and they respond with raucous chants repeating it back. Quote, "It's no accident that joy, a battle-tested version of it, has become the backbone of Ms. Harris's campaign." We will be joined by Beto O'Rourke in just a few minutes, but we start today with our dear friend Michael Steele, the former chairman of the RNC, now the co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend. Also, the Reverend Al Sharpton is with us, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, the president of the National Action Network. MSNBC columnist and contributor Charlie Sykes is back, and Democratic strategist Aisha Mills is here, all dear friends of this broadcast. Michael Steele, I start with you. I keep saying this, I think, because I worked on a campaign that tried to manufacture some of these things, momentum, movement in the polls, crowds. It cannot be manufactured. It can be executed. Nope. And we should say this campaign is executing at every level. But this kind of enthusiasm is phenomenon level. Your thoughts?
It is. You organically can't make people like you. You just can't. Sorry. You can have all the bells and whistles. You can open up an airplane hangar, but that doesn't mean people will show up. And they certainly won't show up to the extent that we've seen with Kamala Harris having, okay, open up hangar 2, folks. So, yeah, it's real. And I think it's something You touched on this, I think, earlier in the week, and you emphasized it again in the lead-in, and that is the J word, joy. That is something that's so coming out of the gut that people just feel this sense of relief, that there is relief here. I don't have to live in a dystopian world that's being created by Donald Trump, where the only thing you're telling me is you want to be my dictator and, oh, yeah, you're going to exact retribution on people that you don't like. Meanwhile, leaving on the table all these other issues that are important to me, and therefore I have to wait until you get done with your retribution to address the cost of goods and services, my ability to grow my business, how I'm going to educate the kids in an environment where education may be tricky. And, you know, you got CRT that you're telling me is bad, but I don't think that's a problem because my kid isn't in that grade, you know, all these things and all that pressure. Kamala Harris has found a way to pick a pin and stick a pin in that and break that pressure valve open for folks. And you're seeing it. Folks coming out, they're smiling. They're happy. They're anticipatory. And that, Nicole, there's not a campaign on the planet that can manufacture that. If people don't feel it, they won't give it. And they give it freely when they do, because you're the candidate that brings that out of them. And I think that's something that Kamala has been able to do. And so the more Donald Trump and his ilk mispronounce her name, the more they level up bogus swift voting charges against her VP choice, the more these people fall back on joy. And they're like, I like this feeling better than the crap you're serving up.
You know, Rev, there's a thing I think that women really are feeling, and that is the politics of being underestimated. Vice President Harris has been criticized for laughing, and it seems that she is, pun intended, having the last laugh. Let me read this reporting in the New York Times. Quote, adopting joy as a political shield has allowed Ms. Harris and Mr. Walz to throw some bare-knuckled punches at Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance. Both Democrats do it with a smile, and the crowd eats it up. There is no mistaking the sharpness and the specificity of their attacks, and they do not slide over to his supporters, something that I think people have grappled with for 9 years. They are surgical strikes against Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance.
Very surgical, very strategic. And I think that what is most impressive to me is they refuse to fight his fight plan. Trump is used to setting the pace, setting the tenor of any political battle, and people react to him. What Vice President Harris has done and Governor Walz has done is they've set their own pace, their own tempo, and they're not reacting to him. He will come with an attack. They will just kind of deflate it, may give a 1 or 2 sentence answer, and keep going with a positive agenda and saying at the same time, we're not going back to the days of segregation, misogyny, before pre-Dobbs decision, voter rights, and the like. And as long as you don't fight another person's fight, they become off balance and don't know what to do. Trump has spent the last 2 weeks trying to get his footing on how to even fight this political battle, because he trained for one person, he ends up with a total different person, and he can't intimidate them. Everything he uses is not working. It's like training to fight Joe Frazier and you get Muhammad Ali. Now what do you do?
Well, and I guess instead of sort of piling compliments on top of compliments, Aisha, the point, I think, is that it's working. Let me show you how the Cook Political Report reclassified some of the battleground states. Quote, the nonpartisan Cook Political Report reclassified three key swing states, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, from leaning Republican to toss-ups in its latest analysis. This is the piece that I think makes it news, that the politics of joy are working. And I think it gets at what everyone's talking about, relief. It gets at her being underestimated. But it also gets at the salience and the vastness of not just the Democratic Party and the Democratic ticket, but how many other people want to, find a place inside the pro-democracy coalition.
Absolutely. And look, to quote Jay-Z, men lie, women lie, and numbers don't, right? And that's what we're seeing in one, the polls going up, the cash that's being raised and the cash on hand. And obviously the turnout at these rallies and all the enthusiasm that we see around the country, which is in fact unprecedented. But we have to remember as well that the last, I'd say, decade, really, I mean, even going back to 2008 to now, we have seen a significant enthusiasm on the Democratic side around the democratic process generally, and have had massive turnout, whether it have been Obama, literally the day before the inauguration of Donald Trump. We saw the largest global gathering and movement and march ever in the Women's March. Washington, D.C. was flooded. Cities all around this country, people were participating. You have now Gen Z, a whole new group of voters that are online and who are going to cast their ballots, that are arguably one of the most engaged and active young generations that we've seen in probably 40, 50 years. They grew up in the wake of gun violence. They grew up in this crazy radicalization of the MAGA era. And they also grew up, in a way that they get that their vote matters, that it matters that they get out in the streets and they demonstrate. They're protesting against police brutality. They are grieving around Black bodies in the streets. And so you've got not only more people, you see the numbers happening, but you also have folks who really are pro-democracy and who want to be involved, who have been itching for something to come out and be excited about, and not just to be mad and angry and in protest, which is what we did with the Women's March, but to be celebratory and joyful and to come out and to say, you know what, I know that my presence here matters. I know that my vote is going to count. And I see a new day that is bright, that is full of sunshine, and I'm going to bring that forth. So, yeah, it's exciting to remember in this moment, as much as Donald Trump and MAGA want you to believe that everything is nasty and dark and gloomy, that the majority of the people are positive and enthusiastic and participatory. And that is what we see playing out right now. And I think that's why Kamala ultimately, in my opinion, is going to win, because you can't bottle up that energy and put it back. You can't push that back. That's why we're not going back.
All right, let me bring into our coverage former Democratic Congressman from Texas, Beto O'Rourke. We have spoken about so many of these sort of flashpoints, and I wonder what your take is, sort of have been campaigned through the Trump era and been face-to-face with so many voters and constituents. What do you think is happening on the ground?
Whatever it is, it makes me so happy. I have not felt like this in a really long time. And if I'm anything like millions of other Democrats and probably millions of independent and probably even millions of Republican voters across the country, we just didn't know how badly we needed this right now. I mean, you can focus group things, you can poll test certain messaging, you can look at the metrics in dollars raised or crowd attendance, but something that transcends all of that is the subject of your program today, which is the joy that I see in the Harris and Walz campaign. And as many have said before me on this show, they're no longer playing defense. There's not that sense of fear or even doom about all these terrible things that Donald Trump is going to do to this country. And he will do these terrible things to the country if he's elected. But it's almost as though we've kind of swept that aside to fiercely focus on the future, a really beautiful future for this country, an ambitious future for this country. Instead of hatred, there is hope. Instead of grievance, there is aspiration. And that's really America at its best. And I just can't tell you how proud I am of Vice President Harris and Governor Walz for finding this moment and getting kind of past the stuff that gets cooked up in political laboratories or the corporate side of our politics, and just finding what is fundamental to democracy, which is people being with people, finding connection and joy in that. And that, I think, more than anything else, is going to power their victory in November.
You know, I obviously track some of my former colleagues from, it feels like another time, right? When there was a Republican Party that hadn't sort of imploded and rotted from the inside. And some of the arguments from David French and from Charlie Sykes, who's also on this panel, and from Adam Kinzinger are the most aggressively pro-Harris-Walz arguments that are out there. And I wonder if how much of that you chalk up to how brazenly autocratic and negative Trump is, or how ripe this moment was for the leadership of someone like Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with Trump, for sure. But I also think it has a lot to do with the Democratic ticket. And it's not news to anyone that there was a lot of uncertainty about this ticket, even as recently as a month ago, and about the prospects of President Biden winning re-election, despite the extraordinary record he was able to put together in 3.5 years, arguably the most effective president of my lifetime, of my 51 years on this planet. And I think there were some open questions about Vice President Harris, to be honest, but I think she's answered those. The bounce in her step, the smile on her face, the confidence with which she moves right now, the command and control that she has on the issues, on the people that she's engaging with, on her ability to work with the press and really kind of dismiss the bizarre behavior of Donald Trump is really something. And I also think it's meaningful that, as you pointed out in the opening, that Trump is in Montana, of all places, right now. Is that because they feel like they have to play defense in a place that should have been reliably red? I don't know, but I can tell you in Texas, which Barack Obama lost by 16 points in 2012, Hillary Clinton lost by 9 points in 2016, and Joe Biden only lost by 5.4% in 2020. This is really the sleeper battleground state. The last time I saw Reverend Al Sharpton before this show today was at the Celebration of Life services for Sheila Jackson Lee, one of the most extraordinary champions, human rights, civil rights, and voting rights in this country. And at the end of Reverend Sharpton's speech, that entire congregation in the sanctuary was on their feet, rising to the occasion, both in memory of Sheila Jackson Lee and everything she's done to bring us to this moment, but also in the recognition that we're on the precipice of something absolutely amazing. And just think about 40 electoral college votes in Texas. If at a minimum we can get Trump to play defense here because of this changing dynamic, it's going to open up other possibilities in other states. And someday sooner than later, and maybe it's 2024, we win Texas.
I am not a skeptic of the inevitability of that, because I think what you're seeing at the national level is that there is a ceiling to the politics of hate and division. And I like that Kamala Harris describes herself as the underdog. I think that's the right way to run any race, but especially this one. But I'm excited to see Governor Walz at some high school football games in this great state of Texas. Tell me about the Tim Walz you know.
So got to know this guy serving on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. As you know, 24 years in the Army National Guard, rose to the rank of Command Sergeant Major, the highest rank for an enlisted officer in the history of the United States Congress, 240 years plus, but also just a genuine mensch, just a wonderful human being. Reverend Sharpton knows this, your other panelists know this. You know, most politicians, most members of Congress, they'll storm into that committee room and give a speech for 5 minutes and then make sure it pops on social media, and then they'll leave the room. Walz was the first guy there, shaking the hands of every veteran service organization that would come in the room. He was the last guy to leave. He would bring Republicans and Democrats alike together to work on legislation to, for example, open up more mental health care access at a time that veterans were taking their lives at an alarming rate. And who signed that legislation? It was none other than Donald Trump. This guy can work with anyone, anytime, anywhere. And to meet him is to like him. And it gets back to this idea of joy in the campaign. Could Kamala Harris have picked a better contrast to J.D. Vance, who I think in opposite to Walz, to know that guy is to really detest that guy, and at a minimum to wonder what that guy really believes in and is for, having previously referenced Donald Trump as America's Hitler, as saying that this person is the worst thing to happen to American politics. And to change his stripes so blatantly in the service of his own personal ambition, that is not something that is going to rally voters or help that Trump ticket. So we are really lucky to have Governor Walz, who, in addition to all of his likable characteristics, has really done some amazing things in Minnesota, like making sure that hungry kids can eat, like putting $1 billion into affordable housing, one of the most significant challenges that we have as a country right now, and making sure that he uses political capital to help people who desperately need it. That's what this country wants, deserves, needs, and will get when Harris-Walz win in November.
Beto, I hope you will come back and talk to us. We miss talking to you, and it's great to have you. And you obviously know and feel a lot of what these two are doing all across the country. Thank you for making time for us today.
Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you. The panel sticks around. We didn't get to the great Charlie Sykes yet. We'll do that as soon as we come back from break.
When you're raised by an immigrant mother,
you learn what's possible with determination.
And determination is how Kamala Harris
went from working in McDonald's to
prosecutor,
state attorney general,
U.S. senator,
and our vice president.
In only one generation.
And with that same determination,
she always defended us.
As a prosecutor, she protected us from violent criminals.
As attorney general,
she beat the banks that kicked families out of their homes.
As our vice president,
she fights for women's reproductive rights every day.
And she beat the pharmaceutical companies to lower costs for insulin and prescriptions.
As our president,
determination
is how she'll stop the corporations who gouge our families
on rent
and groceries.
And she won't stop fighting
until we win.
Because she knows,
with determination,
when we fight, we win!
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
We're back. We're all back. I'm Charlie Sykes. What's amazing to me is that Kamala Harris has stolen the brand of the fighter from the guy who, if he could, would bathe in the sweat from all those wrestling things he likes to go to. And she has done it without resorting to identity politics, without resorting to cheap attacks, but by doing that, telling her story in this sort of vein of, I mean, I think her slogan is, when we fight, we win.
Yeah, I mean, that's an effective ad. Look, I want to go back to this discussion about joy and reframe it just slightly, because it has, I think, a surprising, I think as a surprising salience. Again, you can just sense that people are kind of taken aback by what's been happening. But it's not just joy. When you break it down, what she's offering is optimism, hope. And I think this is the most surprising thing of all. As an incumbent vice president, they have now become the ticket of change. They have become the ticket of turning the page. Now, think about that. Hope was the slogan that Barack Obama used in 2008, and it swept aside, you know, the Republicans back then. In 1980, Ronald Reagan was a change agent, but was also known for his sunny optimism. But I think that this is the thing that's really kind of, I've been trying to sort it out, because normally an incumbent vice president is saddled with all of the baggage of the incumbent party, right? And of course, you know, she still has to carry all of that. But right now, when voters go to the polls in November, they're going to be thinking, do we want to turn the page? Do we want to look ahead? And that would be not 4 more years of Donald Trump. And the contrast that they've created with Tim Walz to J.D. Vance is not just ideological. It's the fact that Tim Walz is likable. He's normal. Yeah. He's like an everyday guy, as opposed to this weird homunculus that, you know, this weird bearded homunculus that Donald Trump has chosen for reasons that are not completely clear anymore. So it's not just joy. It's the fact that they're tapping into all of the themes that I think have been markers for some rather significantly historical successful campaigns.
When we come back, how Governor Tim Walz turned his record of military service into a congressional record of helping America's veterans. That story's next.
At 17, I joined the Army National Guard. For 24 years, I proudly wore the uniform of this nation. And that service, just as it did for my dad, a Korean War era veteran, and millions of others, I got the GI Bill and it gave me a shot at a college education.
It's such a key pillar of his life story as he tells it, and of his personal and political identity as well. Tim Walz, among many other impressive distinctions, is a veteran. You heard the story, 24 years, promoted again and again, up to the rank of Command Sergeant Major, among the highest honors for enlisted men and women in the military. He retired a Master Sergeant and a recipient of the Army Commendation Medal for meritorious service and 2 Army Achievement Medals, according to the New York Times. Then it was off to Congress, where Walz rose to ranking member status in the House Veteran Affairs Committee. During his time in Congress, Walz helped craft a mountain of legislation designed to help veterans. It included bills on suicide prevention and an expansion of the GI Bill. It is a resume to be proud of, but allies of Donald Trump are actually attacking the Minnesota governor's record. This was J.D. Vance today.
Well, I wonder, Tim Walz, when were you ever in war? When was this, what was this weapon that you carried into war, given that you abandoned your unit right before they went to Iraq, and he has not spent a day in a combat zone? What bothers me about Tim Walz is the stolen valor garbage. Do not pretend to be something that you're not. And if he wants to criticize me for getting an Ivy League education, I'm proud of the fact that my mamaw supported me, that I was able to make something of myself. I'd be ashamed if I was him and I lied about my military service like he did.
Joining our conversation, host of the Independent Americans podcast, founder of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Paul Rieckhoff, is here. Also joining us, retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant, founder of Democratic Majority Action PAC, Amy McGrath, is here. Let me show both of you what Wes Moore had to say about that attack line from J.D. Vance.
I think J.D. Vance knows, as being a corporal, that you don't get to Sergeant Major just because. You get to Sergeant Major because you've served this country. You get to Sergeant Major because you were willing to put on the uniform and put the flag of this country on your shoulder. So if J.D. Vance is going to go after Tim Walz, I would suggest, and he would take from his own military training, his own military experience, do not start with trying to attack the fact that someone raised their hand to serve this country.
Paul Rieckhoff, your thoughts and reaction to all of this?
Well, as usual, Wes Moore is right, and he is a North Star for our country, and I'm honored to call him a friend, but I'm also honored to call Tim Walz a friend. I've known him for almost 20 years, and he is a person of integrity, character, honor. He's one of the most honorable, hardworking politicians I've ever met. I like him so much, it's hard for me to believe sometimes he's a politician. We worked together for so many years on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. His time in the National Guard is very important. 24 years as a Sergeant Major. He served his community and his country. He's trained, he's been trained. He understands what it's like to wear the uniform. But in many ways, what he did in Congress was even more important, because that was really transformative. He was there every single time we needed him for over a decade. And Republicans will tell you this too. Everybody who's worked on the Hill knows that Tim Walz delivered for veterans on mental health, on the Clay Hunt Suicide Prevention Act. He was the lead sponsor on the GI Bill, on VA reform. Time and time again, Tim Walz was there. And I call him, a lovable bulldog. I mean, that's what he is. You love Tim Walz, but you also respect Tim Walz because nobody works harder. And I think you're going to hear a lot more of that in the next couple of years, especially from Republicans who know that when the rubber meets the road, for veterans especially, Tim Walz has been there.
Amy, it is so rare and cool to hear Paul so excited about somebody that we cover on this program. Usually it's a darker, bleaker topic. But I wonder your reaction, and I wonder what you think of this strategy. I mean, J.D. Vance's sort of out of the gate message today is to attack Tim Walz' service?
It's actually really bizarre, the whole thing. So go back, your question about the strategy. This ticket of Vance-Trump, or Trump-Vance, is the most unpatriotic ticket in American history. I mean, just last week, they were praising and congratulating Vladimir Putin for the prisoner exchange. You know, they're still talking about pulling out of NATO. This is something that veterans fought to build and protect for years. We have Russia endorsing the Trump-Vance ticket. You know, they are doing the work of our adversaries. And this last example of him attacking Governor Walz this way is just another example of Trump attacking veterans. He's done it before. He calls us suckers and losers. And now he unfortunately has another veteran to be able to go after one of his own in a really nasty, dishonest way. And to me, it's just outrageous to say that somebody that served for 24 years wanted to get out so that he couldn't go to combat. I mean, seriously, everybody that serves, Paul knows this, you don't get a choice for where you get deployed. You know, he served honorably for 24 years on a really hard job as our field artillery. And make no mistake, I mean, J.D. Vance, he was in a desk job in Iraq, in air-conditioned tent. So let's not pretend here. This is ridiculous.
Amy, what do you think the response and reaction will be among veterans?
Well, I think veterans in general don't really like to see when other veterans attack each other. I mean, we all know what it's like to serve. We all know that you don't get a choice for where you go. And we all believe that every job, you know, within the service is important. So I don't understand why you would attack and go after somebody, especially when he rose to the rank of command sergeant major. I mean, Paul was exactly right. That is no small feat. Ask any veteran what the difference between a corporal, which is what J.D. Vance was, and a command sergeant major. There's a big difference there. So I frankly don't understand it. But again, it's what he does.
Paul, you were adamant about the value that a veteran would bring to the Harris ticket. Vice President Harris saw it the same way. I wonder if you can just speak about why that was ahead of this pick so important to you and how you think she should deploy Governor Walz in the next 90 days. Politically.
I actually spoke to Tim Walz a couple weeks ago, and I wasn't sure if he was actually in the running. And I'm excited as an independent to see that he was, because I was hoping the Democrats wouldn't screw this up and pick someone without national security experience. They only had a couple options. I mean, they could go with Mark Kelly, or they could go with Pete Buttigieg, or they could go with Tim Walz. And Tim Walz is exciting for a lot of reasons, but I think most of all because he actually sounds like an independent. He sounds like someone who's a maverick. He understands how to talk to people. He's a coach. He's a teacher. He's a dad, and he feels like a normal person. But he's a bit more than normal because he works so hard. He's so smart. He's such an effective communicator. And I think that's what Kamala Harris saw. She saw someone who can get her ground in red states, who can pick off some people in swing states, who can move independents. Half of veterans are independent, and I think there's going to be a war between the warriors, which frankly makes me sad. I don't like seeing J.D. Vance and Tim Walz fighting on any level, and I hope maybe they could even do a ceasefire here and say, let's set the right tone, because an important piece here, Nicole, is this isn't going to be the first time we're going to have veterans run against each other. You're probably going to see somebody like Wes Moore. Maybe you'll see Amy McGrath. There's going to be a generation from both parties and maybe from no party at all. And I think they both have an opportunity to set a peaceful tone, a respectful tone, like we saw among the World War II veterans that helped do so much for this country in a bipartisan way.
When we come back, we'll meet a longtime childhood friend of Vice President Kamala Harris's. Talk to her about what she wants America to know about her dear friend and her reaction to the energy and exuberance the vice president has brought to the campaign trail. That's next.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, for the trust you put in me, but maybe more so, thank you for bringing back the joy.
He really knows how to sum up this moment in our politics. That was Minnesota Governor Tim Walz in his debut as Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate on the joy she has injected back into our politics after the darkness of Donald Trump. That joy is seemingly infectious. You can feel it in the cheering crowds at her rallies and her campaign spots, and radiating from the podium out of every speech she's given on the campaign trail. Take a look.
The path to the White House runs right through this state. We are joyful warriors. Joyful warriors. Do we believe in freedom? Do we believe in opportunity? Do we believe in the promise of America? And are we ready to fight for it?
Let's bring in longtime childhood friend of Vice President Kamala Harris's, author of Friends from the Beginning, The Berkeley Village That Raised Kamala and Me, Stacey Johnson Batiste. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Nicole.
So what is this like for you to watch her? Obviously, she's always been successful, but this is a political phenomenon and the world is watching.
Absolutely. I mean, it is in one sense, it's surreal, but on another, I mean, it feels like divine intervention in a way. It feels like it's more than a movement. I mean, it just seems like her entire career path, her life journey has led her to this point. And it's, you know, Kamala has always been a very, very special person. She's always had a magnanimous personality and just the kind of person that you just feel good and really happy to be around. And, you know, hearing you say joy, bringing joy back, that happens to be one of the chapters in my book. And, you know, she is one that is uniting people. She is connected. She's always been that way. So it's just beautiful.
You know, she's also doing it with real clear eyes. I mean, one of the lines at her giant speech was, "We're the underdogs." And she seems to sort of match this soaring language of our desperation to feel good again about our politics with real political reality that she's got. I mean, I think today she said she's got 89 days, and it's about the work and understanding hard work. Just talk about, I mean, we all see and we get to broadcast her political talents, but talk about what maybe people are underestimating, and that's her political acumen.
So you use the word underdog, and ever since we were little girls, Kamala has always had a fighting spirit and, you know, the kind of person who will stand up for the underdog and who will take on bullies. She has been that way her entire life and throughout her entire career. I just think that, you know, there is so much hope now, and people are excited about politics. She has always connected very well with children and the youth. So it's so encouraging seeing people, particularly our youth, wanting to participate and having that enthusiasm about politics again.
One of the things that burst into public view was at her very first campaign event. She went to the Wilmington campaign headquarters, and I'm sure you were watching. And President Joe Biden called in. He still had COVID, and it's clear that her loyalty to him and her bond with him. He told her, he said, "I'm watching you, kid. I love you," and she said, "I love you." I don't know that we'd seen, I mean, I think it was clear that they are close. It's clear that she was the best surrogate after the debate and up to the moment when President Biden decided to step off the top of the ticket. But just talk about her relationship with President Joe Biden.
Yes. One of the things that I admire most about Kamala is she has always been a steadfast, loyal friend, loyal partner, loyal teammate. And I mean, that was a true testament to her character. And, you know, she is the kind of person that she feels very deeply. You know, she's a very compassionate person. She's a very thoughtful person and a very considerate person. And when she says that she loves Joe Biden, she means it from her heart. And we love her. I mean, you know, this is more than a job or an appointment. She believes wholeheartedly in working hard for the people. She has always been Kamala, working hard for the people. That is who she is. That is her passion and her purpose. And she brings her whole, you know, total self in it, her humanity.
It's so great to get to talk to you and to sort of see that what people are responding to is, you know, I think politics are this giant X-ray, and it's what the voters are saying. Stacey, it's so great to have you here. Thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
This has been Primetime Weekend. I'm Nicole Wallace. Please tune into Deadline White House and all of our primetime shows weekdays on MSNBC.